Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the frigid, air-conditioned space of the conference room, as sharp and sterile as the polished mahogany table between them. Maya Ortega stared at her regional manager, Mr. Henderson, convinced for a wild second that she had misheard. He hadn't raised his voice. His expression was placid, almost bored, the kind of look a man gives when informing you that the 2:30 meeting has been pushed to 3:00. But that's not what he'd said. "I'm sorry?" Maya whispered, the sound swallowed by the room's oppressive quiet. Her left arm, wrapped in a thick gauze bandage from the wrist to the elbow, throbbed with a dull, insistent pain. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, a symphony of corporate perfection in his tailored suit and wrinkle-free shirt. He steepled his fingers, a gesture he'd probably learned in a management seminar. "Maya, we are a family at Golden Years Home Care. You know this. We've discussed it in our quarterly team-building exercises." He spoke as if reciting from a script, his gaze fixed somewhere just over her shoulder. "But families have rules. And the rule you broke wasn't just a guideline. It was a core tenet of our liability and insurance framework. I have your signed acknowledgement of the protocol manual right here." He tapped a neat stack of papers, her name visible on the top sheet. The memory of signing it during her orientation, a blur of beige walls and droning HR videos, felt like a lifetime ago. It was certainly a lifetime before this morning. "You abandoned your client," Henderson continued, his tone devoid of any emotion save a mild administrative disappointment. "You exposed the company to an unacceptable level of risk. I'm sure you understand we have to protect the brand." He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there was a chilling emptiness, a complete lack of recognition for the human being sitting across from him. "Your decision, while spirited, was a direct violation of Section 4, subsection B of the Caregiver Emergency Protocol." He slid a small, generic box of tissues across the table toward her, another programmed gesture, an automated response to anticipated female emotion. She didn't reach for it. Her hands were clenched into fists in her lap, her knuckles white. Her mind, in a desperate attempt to reject the present, reeled backward, away from the icy conference room and back to the warmth, the terrifying, suffocating heat of just 3 hours ago. The day had begun, as it always did, with the 6:00 a.m. alarm. A slice of weak morning light cut through the blinds of her small, tidy apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The place was clean but worn. The sofa sagged in the middle, the bookshelf was slightly bowed from the weight of her paperbacks, and the magnet, holding a utility bill to the fridge, also pinned a pale pink slip of paper. A first warning eviction notice, partially obscured. She'd made a habit of hiding the ugliest parts of her reality, even from herself. She went through the motions, a quiet ballet of survival. Coffee brewed just a little weaker to make the grounds last longer. A glance at her banking app, $87, $41. Payday wasn't for another week. She pulled on the drab beige polo shirt with the Golden Years Home Care logo stitched over the heart, a smiling, generic elderly couple that looked nothing like the reality of her work. The uniform felt like armor and a cage all at once. Her client, Mr. Abernathy, lived in a large, modern apartment complex that tried to project an image of cheerful community but felt as sterile as a hospital. He was in the late stages of dementia, a quiet, gentle soul adrift in the fog of his own mind. For 3 hours that morning, she'd been his anchor. She'd helped him with his medication, prepared his oatmeal, and read to him from a worn book of Robert Frost poems, her voice a low, steady murmur in the silent apartment. "Whose woods these are, I think I know," she read, her gaze drifting to the window. In the manicured courtyard below, a small boy with a shock of brown hair was kicking a soccer ball against a brick wall. Leo. He lived in the apartment across the hall. He was a spark of pure, unbridled energy in this quiet, sleepy building. She smiled. "He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow." The smell came first, faint, acrid, like burnt plastic. She paused her reading, sniffing the air. Maybe someone had left something on the stove. Then came the sound, a high-pitched, insistent beeping from down the hall. Not the building's main fire alarm, she noted with a flicker of unease, but a smaller, domestic smoke detector. It was getting louder, faster. She eased Mr. Abernathy back into his recliner, his eyes closed, and stepped to her apartment door, cracking it open. Hazy gray smoke curled in the air of the main hallway, snaking from beneath the door of the Vance family's apartment. Leo's apartment! Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Her training, drilled into her through mind-numbing online modules, screamed in her head. She pulled out her work phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed the Golden Years emergency line. Busy. She tried again. Busy. She frantically scrolled through the digital protocol manual on her phone, the screen's glow harsh in the dimming hallway. The words seemed to leap out at her, written in a blood-red, bold font. In the event of an off-site emergency, caregiver's primary duty is to secure the client, evacuate the client to a safe distance, and await instructions. Do not engage in external situations. Do not re-enter a potentially hazardous zone. She looked from the words on the screen to Mr. Abernathy, frail and peaceful in his chair, tethered to an oxygen tank. Then she looked at the smoking door across the hall. A cough. A child's cough, small and choked, came from inside the Vance's apartment. It was followed by a weak, terrified cry. "Mommy?" The sound shattered her paralysis. It wasn't a situation or a hazard anymore. It was Leo. His parents both worked. He was probably home for a lunch break from day camp, a latchkey kid for just an hour a day. He was alone. The phone in her hand, with its list of rules and its busy emergency line, suddenly felt absurdly useless. She looked at the red text one last time. "To hell with protocol," she whispered, the words a foreign, liberating taste in her mouth. Action took over. She couldn't move Mr. Abernathy quickly down 3 flights of stairs. She wheeled his recliner into the far corner of his living room, away from the shared wall, and cracked open the window, praying the smoke wouldn't find him. She grabbed the small fire extinguisher from under his kitchen sink, a device she was technically not authorized to use, and ran out the door. She pounded on the Vance's door. "Leo, it's Maya from across the hall. Can you hear me?" Only another choked cough answered. The doorknob was hot. She threw her shoulder against the wood, once, twice. On the 3rd try, the lock splintered and the door flew inward, unleashing a wave of thick, black, choking smoke. It was like stepping into a nightmare. The heat was a physical blow. The fire was in the kitchen, a geyser of orange flame erupting from a pot left on the stove. "Leo!" she screamed, dropping to her knees where the air was clearer. Her eyes streamed, her lungs burned. She crawled forward, shouting his name over and over. She found him in his bedroom, huddled in a closet, his face pale and tear-streaked. He was wheezing, his asthma clearly aggravated by the toxic air. He was clutching his soccer ball. "It's okay, buddy. I've got you," she managed, her voice a raw rasp. She scooped his small, trembling body into her arms, pulling the collar of her polo shirt over his mouth and nose. As she turned to fight her way back out, a piece of burning plastic trim dripped from the ceiling, landing on her left forearm. The pain was searing, immediate, but she barely registered it. Her entire world had narrowed to the single, vital task of carrying the child in her arms to safety. She stumbled out into the hallway, gasping in the relatively clean air, just as the thunder of heavy boots echoed up the stairwell. 2 firefighters in full gear rounded the corner. She didn't stop until she was on the landing, pushing Leo into the arms of a waiting paramedic. Only then did her legs give out, and she collapsed against the wall in a fit of ragged, soul-deep coughs. "So you'll need to sign here," Mr. Henderson said, pushing a termination form and a pen across the polished table. The sound snapped Maya back to the cold, cruel reality of the conference room. "It just acknowledges that we had this conversation and that you understand the reason for your dismissal was for cause." She stared at the line where her signature was supposed to go. For cause. The cause was that she had saved a child's life. The cause was that she had chosen a human being over a rule book. Slowly, numbly, she took the pen. Her hand was shaking. She signed her name. He took the form back, his movements brisk and efficient, and slid a thin envelope toward her. Her final paycheck. It was already calculated, already printed. They had known they were going to fire her before she even walked in the door. "Good luck in your future endeavors, Maya," he said, standing up, the meeting clearly over. He didn't offer a handshake. She walked out of the Golden Years office, the automatic glass doors whispering shut behind her. She stood on the hot pavement of the parking lot, the bland corporate park stretching out around her. The sun was blindingly bright. In her hand, she clutched the envelope with her final pay. In her mind, she saw the terror in Leo's eyes. On her arm, the burn had begun to throb with a furious, undeniable heat. The 24 hours of her ordeal had just begun. Her first stop was the hospital. Not for her arm, not yet, but for Leo. She needed to know he was okay. The emergency room was a controlled cacophony of beeping machines, hurried footsteps, and hushed, anxious conversations. When she asked the receptionist about Leo Vance, she was directed to a small, sterile office belonging to Brenda, the hospital administrator. Brenda was a woman in her 60s with a helmet of perfectly sprayed gray hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She listened to Maya's explanation with a look of profound skepticism. "I understand your concern," Brenda said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "But we can't give out patient information due to HIPAA. Are you family?" "No, but I'm the one who—" "Then I can't help you," Brenda cut her off flatly. She then looked down at the bandage on Maya's arm. "Were you treated for that injury here earlier?" "Yes, a paramedic bandaged it at the scene, and I came here to have it properly looked at." Brenda's fingers tapped on her keyboard. "I see. Well, since you were treated, we'll need your insurance information." She printed out a form and slid it across the desk. "As your injury wasn't sustained while performing official duties for your employer, and I've just been on the phone with a Mr. Henderson from Golden Years who confirmed this, you'll be responsible for the full cost of this visit." Maya's eyes scanned the itemized list on the page. ER admittance fee, materials fee, Level 3 physician consultation. The estimated total at the bottom was $1,250. The $87 in her bank account seemed to laugh at her. Henderson had already called. He hadn't wasted a single second protecting his company, throwing her to the wolves with cold, calculated efficiency. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. She left the hospital without getting her burn treated, and with a bill that might as well have been for $1 million. Next, she had to go to the police precinct to give a formal statement. She'd hoped it would be a simple matter of telling her story, of closing the book on the day's events. She was wrong. She was led not to a desk, but to a small windowless room with a metal table and 2 chairs. Officer Miller, the same jaded, impatient cop from the scene, sat across from her. His tone had shifted from dismissive to something bordering on accusatory. "So, let me get this straight," he said, clicking his pen. He wasn't taking notes, he was just making a point. "You, an unlicensed individual with no firefighting training, made the decision to enter a burning structure?" "There was a child inside," Maya said, her voice quiet. "A child who is now safe, yes, we're all happy about that," Miller conceded with a wave of his hand. "But let's talk about the other side of this coin. You left an elderly man, your client, Mr. Abernathy, who, according to the report, is on supplemental oxygen, unattended. Is that correct?" "I moved him to the safest part of the apartment. I opened a window for him." "An open window he could have fallen out of? An oxygen tank that could have exploded if the fire had spread? You see the problem, Ms. Ortega. There are protocols for a reason." He leaned forward, his expression grim. "Golden Years Home Care has filed a formal complaint against you. They're citing endangerment of a vulnerable adult. And the apartment complex management? They're considering pressing charges for destruction of property. That door you broke down is going to cost a pretty penny to replace." He was twisting everything. Her desperate, life-saving actions were being reframed as a series of reckless crimes. She felt dizzy, as if the world were tilting on its axis. "I'm not a criminal," she whispered, horrified. "I saved a boy's life." "You played the hero," Miller said, his voice flat. "And now there's a mess to clean up. It's always the same." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a restraining order, effective immediately, filed by Golden Years. It forbade her from contacting Mr. Abernathy or his family. The company wasn't just firing her. They were building a legal fortress to make sure she could never tell her side of the story to the one person who might have defended her. She was being systematically erased. She stumbled out of the precinct into the late afternoon sun, the restraining order a flimsy, toxic piece of paper in her hand. The city felt different now, hostile and alien. She went home because it was the only place left to go. Sitting on her sagging couch, the silence of her apartment buzzing around her, she turned on the television for a distraction. And there it was. Her face. A grainy, unflattering photo taken by a bystander, her expression wild, her hair a mess. The local news was leading with the fire. The reporter stood in front of the apartment building, speaking in a grave, sensationalist tone. Then they cut to a professionally lit, pre-recorded interview with Mr. Henderson. He looked calm, compassionate, and utterly in control. "While we are relieved that the child is safe," Henderson said, his voice oozing sincerity, "Golden Years Home Care cannot condone the reckless actions of a former employee who abandoned her vulnerable client and violated critical safety protocols. We have terminated this individual and are cooperating fully with the authorities to ensure such a dangerous lapse in judgment never happens again." The reporter came back on screen. The caregiver, Maya Ortega, has been unreachable for comment. They had her name, they had her face, and they had Henderson's perfectly crafted lie. The story wasn't local woman saves boy from fire. It was controversy surrounds rogue caregiver's reckless actions. The real sickness began when she made the mistake of looking at her phone. Her name was trending on local social media. She opened the app, her thumb moving with a will of its own. It was a tidal wave of vitriol. Of course they fired her. She's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Typical attention seeker. Probably started the fire herself so she could be a hero. What about the old man she left to die? Nobody cares about him, I guess. Hashtag justice for Mr. Abernathy. She looks crazy in that picture. The company did the right thing. Comment after comment, a torrent of poison from strangers who knew nothing but felt everything. They called her stupid, a clout chaser, a danger to society. They dissected her grainy photo, mocked her presumed incompetence, and applauded the soulless corporation that had chewed her up and spit her out. Each message was a fresh cut. She scrolled and scrolled, a perverse need to see just how hated she was driving her on. The world Henderson had created, the narrative he had spun in that cold conference room, had become reality. The eviction notice on her fridge seemed to glow with a new, malevolent intensity. She was jobless, facing a mountain of debt, branded a criminal, and now she was being publicly crucified. She felt a desperate need to talk to someone, anyone. She dialed her older sister, Chloe, who lived 3 states away. "Oh my God, Maya, I saw something online. Are you okay?" Chloe's voice was a welcome comfort for a moment. Maya poured out the whole story, the words tumbling over each other in a rush of despair and disbelief. The firing, the hospital bill, the police report. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Wow, Maya," Chloe finally said, her tone shifting from concern to a familiar, weary frustration. "You always do this. You always lead with your heart and not your head. $1,000 bill? And you lost your job? How are you going to pay your rent now?" The question hung in the air, a practical, brutal counterpoint to Maya's moral crisis. Her sister didn't mean to be cruel, but the words landed like stones. There was no validation, no righteous anger on her behalf. There was only the grim accounting of her failure. The call ended with vague promises to see if I can send you a little something, leaving Maya feeling more alone than ever before. She hung up the phone and looked around her small apartment. It had always felt like a sanctuary, but now it felt like a trap. Her gaze fell on the caregiver certificate hanging on the wall, a symbol of the pride she took in her work. In a sudden, violent surge of rage and grief, she ripped it from the wall, the cheap frame clattering to the floor as she tore the paper in two. She sank onto her couch, buried her face in her hands, and for the first time that day, she cried. Midnight found Sarah Jenkins hunched over her laptop in her cluttered home office, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside her. She ran a small, independent news blog called City Truths, a passion project that barely paid the bills, but fulfilled a need in her to tell the stories the big networks missed. She'd been on her way home from a meeting when she'd seen the smoke. She hadn't been there as a reporter, just a bystander. But she had seen it all. She'd seen the hesitation on the face of the woman in the beige polo shirt. She'd seen the moment that hesitation hardened into resolve. She'd seen her charge into the smoke-filled doorway. And she'd seen her emerge, soot-streaked and coughing, clutching that little boy like he was the most precious thing in the world. She'd even snapped a photo on her phone, an instinct she couldn't suppress. Now she was watching the local news rerun their 600 p.m. story and scrolling through the same cesspool of social media comments Maya had seen. Disgust curdled in her stomach. The narrative was so clean, so corporate, and so profoundly wrong. They had taken an act of breathtaking courage and twisted it into a liability issue. She opened a new document, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was why she'd started City Truths, to fight this exact kind of lazy, cynical storytelling. She began to type, the words flowing out of her, fueled by a pure, righteous anger. The title came to her in a flash. I was there, they're lying about Maya Ortega. She wrote everything she saw, a detailed, passionate first-person account. She described the failure of the building's fire alarms, a detail every other report had missed. She contrasted the terrified, heroic woman she'd witnessed with the cold, corporate caricature being painted by Henderson in the media. And then she uploaded the photo she had taken. It was different from the grainy, wide-eyed shot the news was using. Sarah's photo was clear, close, and devastatingly human. It captured Maya stumbling out of the smoke, her face a mask of determination and exhaustion, her arms wrapped protectively around Leo, whose small face was buried in her shoulder. It was not the picture of a reckless woman, it was the picture of a savior. She hit publish at 12:15 a.m. For an hour, nothing happened. Then, a single comment appeared. Thank you for writing this. I knew there had to be more to the story. Then another. The post was shared on Facebook, then 10 times. A local activist with a large following shared it on Twitter. A college student posted it to Reddit. By 2 o'clock a.m., the post had 1,000 views. By 4 o'clock a.m., it had 50,000. Justice for Maya Ortega began to trend, a small but growing countercurrent to the flood of hate. Someone found Maya's name and started a GoFundMe page for her with the goal of raising $1,250 to cover her hospital bill. The first donation was for $10, then $20, then $50. As dawn broke over the city, Maya was asleep on her couch, an exhausted, dreamless slumber. She was oblivious to the digital army that was assembling on her behalf. The story had gone viral, but this time it was the truth. At 9 o'clock a.m., Leo Vance's parents, Maria and Tom, stood on the steps of the hospital, blinking in the glare of news cameras. They had spent the night by their son's bedside, sick with worry and then flooded with relief. In the early hours of the morning, Tom's cousin had sent him the link to the City Truths blog. Reading it, they finally understood the full scope of what had happened. They saw the picture of the woman who had carried their son from the fire, and they saw how she was being vilified for it. Tom Vance, a construction worker with calloused hands and a steady voice, stepped up to the microphones. My name is Tom Vance. This is my wife, Maria. Our son, Leo, is going to be okay, he began, his voice thick with emotion. Maria stood beside him, her hand clutching his arm, tears streaming down her face. He's okay for one reason and one reason only. A woman named Maya Ortega. The woman you are all calling reckless is the only reason my son is alive. He paused, letting the words sink in. The fire alarms in our building did not go off. The system failed. Maya Ortega did not. She ran into a burning apartment for a boy she barely knew. For Golden Years Home Care to fire her? For the police to question her? For anyone to say a single bad word against her? It's a disgrace. She is not a rogue caregiver. She is a hero. She's an angel. We just want to find her and thank her. He then announced they were filing a lawsuit against the apartment complex for negligence and against Golden Years Home Care for the blatant defamation of Maya's character. The effect was instantaneous. The narrative didn't just flip, it shattered. On the GoFundMe page, the donations, which had been trickling in, became a flood. The total blew past the $1,250 goal, climbing to $10,000, then $50,000, then $100,000 as the Vance's speech was replayed on every news channel. The tide had turned. In the gleaming headquarters of Golden Years Home Care, chaos reigned. The phone lines were jammed with furious callers. The company's Facebook page was a graveyard of one-star reviews and angry face emojis. News vans were camped outside the main entrance. In his office, Mr. Henderson was sweating through his expensive shirt as he was being screamed at by the CEO on a speakerphone. "Henderson, you created a PR apocalypse," the voice boomed. "You took a bona fide hero and turned her into a martyr on the 6 o'clock news. Our stock is down 7 points. Fix this. Fix it now." Maya woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. She ignored it, her body aching, her mind still thick with despair. But it didn't stop. She finally picked it up, expecting more hate. Instead, she saw dozens of notifications from the GoFundMe page and a text from Sarah Jenkins. "Check your GoFundMe and call me. The world is on your side." She opened the page. The number at the top made her gasp. $132,150. She stared, convinced it was a mistake. Then she saw Sarah's blog post and the video of the Vances' speech. She watched it, tears welling in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. They believed her. They were fighting for her. Her phone rang again. The caller ID read Henderson Robert. She almost declined it, but a newfound strength, a flicker of defiance, made her answer. "Maya, hello." Henderson's voice was a completely different instrument now, no longer cold and clinical, but high-pitched, sycophantic, and dripping with panic. "I've just seen the news, and there has been a terrible misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication. We want to make this right." "Oh, really?" Maya said, her own voice startlingly calm. "Yes. We are formally retracting your termination. We'd like to offer you your job back with a significant raise, of course. And we will cover all your medical expenses and offer a formal, public apology. We value you, Maya, your family." Maya listened to him stammer and plead. She pictured him in his cold office, sliding the box of tissues toward her as he dismantled her life. She thought of the fear in Leo's eyes and the burn on her arm. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice clear and firm. "When my arm was burned and a little boy was in the hospital, you didn't care if I was okay? You didn't care that he was alive. You cared about your brand. My answer is no. I will not be returning to your family. Please don't contact me again." She hung up the phone, her heart hammering in her chest. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated power. She was no longer the compliant woman who followed the rules. She was the woman who had run into a fire, and she was done being burned. Sarah Jenkins arrived at her apartment an hour later, and the two women sat on the couch watching the story of Maya's vindication play out on every channel. Her phone rang again. It was an unknown number with a 202 area code. "Probably another reporter," Maya said, moving to decline it. "Answer it," Sarah urged. "You never know." Maya hesitantly pressed the green button. "Hello?" A warm, professional voice answered. "Hello, am I speaking with Ms. Maya Ortega?" "Yes, this is she." "Excellent. Please hold for the White House." Maya's eyes went wide. She looked at Sarah, her mouth agape, and mouthed the words, "The White House." Sarah's jaw dropped. A soft click sounded on the line, and then a new voice came on, a voice that was instantly, astonishingly familiar. "Ms. Ortega? This is the President of the United States." Maya forgot how to breathe. "I've been following your story today, Ms. Ortega," the president continued, his tone warm and genuine. "In a moment of crisis, you had a choice between following a corporate directive and following your conscience. You chose conscience. That kind of selfless courage, especially in the face of the indifference you were shown afterward, represents the very best of the American spirit." He went on, but Maya could barely process the words. She was floating. "For that reason," the president concluded, "I would be honored if you would accept the Presidential Citizens Medal, our nation's second highest civilian award, for your exemplary deeds of service to your fellow citizen. We'd like to hold the ceremony tomorrow, if that works for you." The next afternoon, Maya Ortega stood in the Oval Office. She wore a simple, elegant blue dress she had bought that morning, a quiet act of rebellion paid for by the kindness of strangers. The Vance family was there, Leo standing in the front, beaming at her with a gap-toothed grin. Sarah Jenkins stood beside them, notepad in hand, crying softly. The President of the United States stood next to Maya, placing the heavy medal, attached to a blue ribbon, around her neck. The room was filled with the quiet clicks of cameras from the press pool. In the back, she saw the same local TV reporter who had called her a rogue caregiver. His face was impassive, but he couldn't meet her eyes. Somewhere in the city, she knew, Henderson and Officer Miller were watching this on television, their worlds shrunk down to the size of a screen, displaying their own irrelevance. Then she was guided to the podium. She looked out at the faces, her heart full. She didn't talk about the company, the money, or the injustice. She talked about what mattered. "Thank you, Mr. President," she began, her voice shaking only slightly. "I'm not a hero. I'm a caregiver. It's my job to care. When I saw that smoke yesterday morning, I didn't see a liability issue or a breach of protocol. I saw a little boy who needed help. For 24 hours, it felt like the world was telling me I had made the wrong choice." She paused, her gaze finding Leo in the crowd. But the only protocol that should ever truly matter is the human one. The one that tells us to help each other, to choose compassion over policy, to choose kindness, especially when it's hard, and especially when no one is watching. She looked down at the medal gleaming on her chest. This isn't just for me, it's for every person who does the right thing when it costs them something. It's for every person who has ever been made to feel small for having a big heart. Thank you. As applause filled the most powerful room in the world, Maya Ortega smiled. It wasn't a triumphant smile or an angry one. It was the calm, peaceful smile of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side, no longer a victim of circumstance, but the master of her own story. The ordeal was over. Her life had just begun.